So let me begin by asking you a question. And the question might be simple, but the answer is not. How comfortable are you to talk about your weaknesses, your deficiencies, things that you lack in, or perhaps even about your fears? Well, it's not easy to answer these questions, isn't it? Because many a times we are unable to express ourselves completely. And it's not about lack of communication. It's because many a times we are not so sure whether we should reveal the true feelings that we have. Now, this is what we call as the ability to demonstrate vulnerability. Vulnerability is a situation or a stage where you're open to any kind of attack. Now, the attack could be physical, it could be emotional, or it could be in any other form. But we're not talking about exposing yourself to an actual physical attack. What we're talking about is the ability to be comfortable with the discomfort that comes along with expressing yourself and your feelings authentically. So, why should you be vulnerable? Because that's who you are. Many a times we are taught from parents, from friends, from teachers, from people around us that you got to be strong, which is true. You got to be strong, but you can't take strength, especially when you're not feeling it. So there are moments when you don't feel like it. There are moments when you feel susceptible. And there are situations where you got to tell people what you're exactly going through. And that's where vulnerability is such an important element, especially if you are a leader. It becomes all the more relevant for you to express vulnerability. Whether a leader or not, vulnerability is a part and parcel of every individual's life. And therefore, it's important for us to understand how do we showcase and demonstrate vulnerability. Let's understand this in further depth. There are four ways you can do this. There are multiple other ways as well, but I think these four are far more critical in the context of demonstrating vulnerability. So, what are these? Number one is to be open to rejection. Now, a lot of times we are afraid of being rejected. For example, it could be asking for a raise, or it could be asking for a promotion, or sometimes a proposal, or maybe any other situation where there is a chance or a risk involved that you might get rejected. And because there is a risk involved that you might get rejected, unfortunately, most of us do not even begin to contemplate trying something. Now, that's where you got to accept vulnerability by accepting rejection in the first place, which means you kind of give yourself a license and say that, you know what, the worst that could happen is that the other person might turn me down. My request would not be accepted, but that's all right for me. Well, the moment you start accepting rejection mentally, you also start gaining the confidence to express your vulnerability. So, accepting the fact that people may or may not agree with what I said, or they may not give me what I'm asking, is the first step to be able to demonstrate your vulnerability. And it's an important area to focus on because a lot of times it's our inner fears that kind of hold us back. But the moment you accept those fears, you're able to leverage on your strengths and use vulnerability to your advantage. The second way of doing this is to share the mistakes that you've committed. Now, I've often seen leaders talk about how successful they have been in their careers. They talk about the awards that they have won. They talk about the accolades that they have garnered from clients, from bosses, from their organizations over the years. But you know what generally happens? The moment you start talking about your victories, your accolades, the initial few minutes might build an euphoria. But later, when people start listening to you consistently, they start to look around and say, you know what, this gentleman is not like me. He is super special. He's a superhuman. I can't be like him. Now that builds a rift, that builds a disconnect. Real connect is built when you expose yourself, when you're vulnerable, which means along with talking about your success stories, you got to also focus on stories that didn't work, that didn't go your way, which means you got to talk about your goof ups, your mistakes. You also got to talk about things that you did not do the right way. And when you talk about mistakes that you committed in your own life, people can connect with you better because they see a portion of their own personality in you. And that's why great leaders always learn the art of exposing themselves, which is to be vulnerable in front of their team members, where they're okay to say that, you know what, I once messed up royally. I goofed up big time. This is what happened. And I was in a suit. So the next time you address perhaps your own team members or a bunch of people with whom you want to establish connect, it's important to be authentic by leveraging the power of vulnerability. Be comfortable in talking about the mistakes that you have committed. Perhaps there is an opportunity for us to all look at each other's mistake and learn from each other's mistakes. Number three is you got to have the ability to express your emotions. Now, I know emotions is something which is true for all of us, but when it comes to expressing emotions, it's something which is not really that easy for all of us, which means that if you feel afraid, it's important to talk about that. If you're feeling sad, it's important to talk about that. And if you're feeling frustrated, guess what? It's important to talk about that. Now, why is it important to talk about it? Because a lot of times suppressed feelings can either lead to conflict, broken relationships, lack of trust, and many other issues. But the moment you're able to talk about how you feel about a certain situation, how does that make you feel in the context of what is happening around you, then you are able to express yourself fully and completely. Now, the moment you're able to express your emotions, your feelings, people acknowledge your feelings. They might not be able to change your feelings, they might not be able to nurse your emotions, but they will at least acknowledge and try to empathize with you. And therefore, it's important in order to demonstrate deeper vulnerability, you have the ability to discuss openly about how you feel about the situation at hand, which means whatever is going through in your mind, you've got to be able to put that across without mincing words. And that's why expressing your emotions is yet another important area that we need to look at. And finally, being honest about your limitations. Now, this is something which in the corporate world is highly contentious. Why should I be talking about my limitations and my deficiencies? Why does the world need to know? Well, maybe the world doesn't need to know about it, but those people whom you care about definitely need to know about it, which could include your manager, your peers, and sometimes even your clients for that matter. Telling people that you're not comfortable in doing something, or telling people that you don't like to do something, or something which is not your natural terrain or territory, is an important and integral part of showcasing your true personality. Often we try to conceal what we lack. We try to put a veil on what is deficient as part of our skill sets. And what that does is that it creates unnecessary expectations in the minds of other people. Whereas a simpler route could be to tell people that, look, I don't know how to do this, or I would need help, or I've never done this before, or I have tried it, but I failed. So would you please help me on this? I think those are the kind of sentences we got to use more often to let other people know about our limitations. Because everybody, mind you, everybody in the world will have limitations. But it's important to express your limitations confidently so that you can overcome those limitations. So rather than concealing those, it's important to accept those, because the moment you accept those limitations, you can do something about it. And that's another important piece of work that we all need to put in terms of demonstrating vulnerability. So those are four things. I won't say they are simple. They require a lot of effort, especially because they're concerned with mental work, but they are important in the context of leading a holistic life rather than leading a fake life, whether it is in the corporate circles or within your families or anywhere for that matter. So here they are once again. Number one is to be open to rejection. Take chances. You might fumble, you might fail, but that's okay. Move on. Number two is to share your mistakes with others openly and transparently. You have an opportunity to connect emotionally with people and also share some learnings with them. Number three is to express your feelings openly. Whether you're feeling sad, you're feeling angry, you're feeling joyous, frustrated, whatever it might be, express yourself. And number four is to be honest about your deficiencies and limitations. Tell people there are things which I can't do, so please help me. Once you master the ability to demonstrate vulnerability, you will be able to connect with people better. You will be able to showcase confidence, which is genuine. Therefore, your relationships will be that much more deeper and that much more sustainable. So try these tips, and perhaps if there are other tips and tools that you have used, which could be added to the list, I would be more than keen to listen to your suggestions as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll join you right again with another topic very, very soon. So bye bye for now.